In the last class, we talked about photosynthesis. If you remember, photosynthesis takes place in plants. This is a really helpful diagram that shows you the two steps of photosynthesis. You can see illustrated on the left side is the light reaction. Remember what we said. The light reaction requires light and water. And it also uses NADP and ADP. And the steps of what happened was, first, light hits the chloroplast. Inside the chloroplast, the chlorophyll, which is inside, absorbs the light. And when chlorophyll absorbs the light, water gets split up into a hydrogen ion and an electron. They go down the electron transport chain, which generates a lot of energy. Meanwhile, the oxygen that was made leaves the leaf through the stomata. And if you remember, the stomata is the opening in the leaf, which is made up of guard cells. At the end of the electron transport chain, two very important energy molecules are made. One is ATP, which is like your car battery, and the other is NADPH. Both of these molecules are needed to run the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle needs ATP, NADPH, and CO2. If you remember, the Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma versus the light reaction takes place in the thylakoid membrane. In the dark reaction, or the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide is put into the cycle. ATP and NADPH are used. Remember from the equation that there's 6 molecules of CO2. At the end of 6 turns, you produce one glucose molecule, which is C6H12O6. Some of that sugar is going to be used right away for the plant for energy, and some of it will be stored in the plant as cellulose. So hopefully this overview has been helpful. Today we're going to talk about how we use glucose to make ATP. This process of using glucose to make ATP is called cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is aerobic, which means that it requires oxygen. I'm going to write down the equation for cellular respiration, and we can think about the relationship between cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Cellular respiration requires oxygen, 6O2, plus glucose, C6H12O6. And in this process, it's going to make 6H2O plus 6 carbon dioxide plus about 36 ATP molecules. This reaction should look somewhat similar to you. We'll try to compare photosynthesis and cellular respiration at the end of the lesson. The mitochondria is where cellular respiration takes place. Notice that the mitochondria also has an inner membrane and an outer membrane, just like the chloroplast. This is evidence that the mitochondria used to be a bacteria. The theory of endosymbiosis can tell you more about this. But this double membrane is a strong piece of evidence that this mitochondria used to be a little prokaryotic organism. What we need to know for cellular respiration is the cristae and the matrix. The cristae are these folds, and in these folds is where the electron transport chain is. Which is the third step of cellular respiration. And the matrix, which is this blue space in between, is where the Krebs cycle takes place. The Krebs cycle is the second step of cellular respiration. So if you can remember that the folds are called the cristae and the matrix is where the Krebs cycle occurs, that will be very helpful. Notice that the structure of the mitochondria has all these folds in and out. The many folds of the mitochondria increases the surface area of the electron transport chain. So if there's more folds, you can have a bigger electron transport chain, which is more reactions. The electron transport chain is where we make ATP, so more reaction means more ATP. This is a side note, and it's a really important idea because it has to do with the importance of the structure and function of the mitochondria. So these folds increase the surface area. So it allows for more reactions to occur. That goes back to one of our big ideas in biology of structure and function. Now we'll look at the steps of cellular respiration. There's three main steps of cellular respiration. The first step of cellular respiration happens outside the mitochondria. This first step is called glycolysis. So glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. Glycolysis, by its name, glyco means sugar, and lysis means to split. So it's splitting sugar. So what we do in glycolysis is we take glucose and we're going to split it into, glucose is a 6-carbon molecule, and we're going to split it into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvate. We also make 2 ATP molecules in this process. So the pyruvate is going to be used in the second step in the Krebs cycle. So we'll bring the pyruvate to the Krebs cycle. In the Krebs cycle, we will use pyruvate and we will use some special electron carriers called NAD and FAD. NAD and FAD carry electrons and are important for the third step, which is the electron transport chain. In this step, since we have 2 pyruvate that enter, the Calvin cycle spins 2 times. We put in 3 NAD per spin, so each spin we're going to end up with 3 NADH are produced, And then each spin we're going to get 2 FADH. And this step is where we produce our carbon dioxide. We get 3 carbon dioxide per spin for a total of 6 carbon dioxide. So during the Krebs cycle, we take the pyruvate, we turn NAD into NADH, and we turn FAD into FADH. Finally, in the electron transport chain, we're going to use FADH and NADH. Again, the FAD is actually going to release its hydrogen and electrons, and the same with NAD. And we're going to have the hydrogens on one side of the membrane and the electrons on the other. This is going to generate a tremendous amount of energy. At the end of this electron transport chain is going to be an oxygen molecule. The oxygen is waiting for an electron, and it's called the final electron acceptor. At the end of this chain, oxygen is going to combine with hydrogen, 2 hydrogen, to make water, and all of these electrons are going to generate ATP. In this step, we can make 32 ATP. We also make 2 ATP in the Krebs cycle. So we put 2 ATP in. So you can see we make 32 ATP in, we make 32 ATP in the electron transport chain, and we make 2 ATP in the Krebs cycle, and we make 2 during glycolysis for a total of 36 electrons total. In the next slide, we'll summarize all the steps for you. So you can see here, step 1 in glycolysis, we take glucose and we turn it into pyruvate. We also make 2 ATP. This happens in the cytosol, or we can say cytoplasm. The pyruvate gets used in the Krebs cycle. In the Krebs cycle, we're going to take that pyruvate and produce 2 ATP, and we're going to produce these electron carriers NAD and FADH2. These electron carriers are going to be used in the final step in the electron transport chain. In this electron transport chain, the hydrogen and the electrons are going to be attracted to each other, and this attraction is going to create a tremendous amount of energy. We're going to make 32 ATP, and the hydrogens are going to combine with the oxygen at the end of the stairway to produce water. So, the final step of cellular respiration produces the greatest number of ATP molecules, 32. You can use this diagram here to compare and contrast the two processes. I'll let you do that on your own. You can pause the video. The final thing we'll do is make a table to compare, to summarize the steps. So if we write the steps, where it happens, what it requires, and then what it produces. This may help you. So remember the equation is 6O2 plus glucose C6H12O6 makes carbon dioxide plus water plus 36 ATP. So we had 3 steps. The first step is glycolysis. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. In glycolysis, we use glucose and we actually start with 2 ATP. It needs 2 ATP to start. And it uses 2 NAD, which is a little tiny battery. And then it's going to produce 2 pyruvate. It produces 4 ATP, but since we use 2 to start, we say that the net is 2 ATP. 2 ATP net. And the NAD becomes NADH, which is an electron carrier. The second step of cellular respiration is called the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle happens in the matrix, and the Krebs cycle uses those 2 pyruvate. It uses 6 NAD and 2 FAD and 2 ATP. This process is going to make your 6 carbon dioxide, 6 NADH, 2 FADH, and 2 ATP. Finally, the electron transport chain is going to happen in the inner mitochondrial membrane, or those folds that we call the cristae. This step is going to use oxygen and all of your electron carriers. So it's going to use the 8 NADH and the 2 FADH. And it'll use 32 ADP. The oxygen is going to combine with all the hydrogens that get released from these electron carriers and produce water. All of these are going to be reduced and will be uncharged, but we're going to make 32 ATP molecules in this final step. So if we add up all the ATPs, we get 32, 34, and 36. I hope this summary is helpful and helps you understand the process of cellular respiration. Thanks.